Okay. So, as I was saying, this participatory research, when you go to workshops, etc., a lot of the emphasis is on the different kinds of methodologies that apply. And I think we got introduced to a couple of those in the first block, including asset mapping, risk mapping. What we're going to do in this session is really just talk a lot more about a lot of different methodologies that are used and how one uses standard data and standard methodologies within the CBPR. So I'll be doing a lot of work on that today. And then this afternoon we're going to be doing an exercise, and I presume all of you got the email in photo voice, which will also form the basis of the second assignment. And then tomorrow there will be more of the methodologies, some discussion around ethical processes, and Frederick Murray, who's from the Department of Health, will talk about his experiences of doing participatory research in Canada, England, and South Africa. Okay, so the first is really the approach of starting to work within a community setting. There are key principles and strategies for this. The essence of CBPR is to work with the community and to work hand in hand with the community. But even the definition of what the community is has to be defined in the joint process, and we spoke a bit about that in the lecture you asked in the last block about identity of community. So we have to take and the ideal is to take leadership from the community. But you need to remember that as a researcher, you are now part of that community and so your needs can also be considered as part of that, and your knowledge is also important in that. But within the standard approach of research is that only the researcher's knowledge applies, and only the researcher's knowledge is of importance, other than what you can garner, bless you, from your respondents. So it's also important to affirm the community members' ideas and knowledge. Standard within communities, you go in with an open approach, rather than a fixed hypothesis or fixed methodology, and then work on an open basis from there to define what's going on and how to work. Okay, so the range of the negotiation. Yeah. So the first thing we have to do is to go back and look at and negotiate the aims and objectives. As you remember in the last lecture, we also spoke about the different levels of community involvement. I'll just do summaries of two systems that I looked at. One is the contracted, where a few community people working on the study. Consultative, you ask people for input and report results back, community advisory boards. Collaborative, you work with local people, drawing on their skills, but the design and research questions are still set by the researchers. And only now when you get to collegiate, working with local people at all phases and all components of the study, are you really starting to approach a genuine CBPR approach. And CABs traditionally have played very small influence in actual research, although they might define certain points of access and entry and replace restrictions. And then the final is to add to this the community being the client requesting your action.
It can not be more collaborative, because usually CABs is often only created after the research has begun and decided and funded.
Yeah, so it's not particularly collaborative. So
collaborative, except for during, perhaps, depending on the PI's approach, but it can be collaborative. But it doesn't really, it's not collaborative at the beginning.
Yeah.
Elements of it could be.
It depends a lot on how the CAB is constructed. It's normally, the standard of an advisory board is to give advice on how to that can reform into a collaborative structure, where they become more appropriate. And these are codifications, so yes, it can reform into that. And there are instances where that has happened. This is really just to give some idea, and then the other system that is used is, where the health department just completely leads and runs operations, and that's often seen in clinics or in surveys. There might be some information education as part of it. This is more focused around intervention, but it does have applications for research as well. When you get some limited input from the community, you can go to comprehensive consultation. And bridging is really starting to look at some kind of power, and that would be the ongoing consultation that we've spoken about. And it's only really when you get to power sharing or community leads. So I'm just raising these as the different models and the different styles of community consultation and working with community. The level of impact sought from the community, will impact on how decisions are made. So if you look at sort of the bottom, either the contractor, the consultative, or the collaborative, they do have some input into the community approach. But ultimately they have very low power in that. And ultimately they are responding to what the researcher needs, which is different to and what we're going to focus on in these lectures. And that is what they got the funding for. What we're going to focus on is largely the upper two options of both, the collegiate or the community as client, or the participation or community lead approaches. And that's really going to be the focus, and that's really the focus of what I would consider genuine CDPR. But obviously the lessons and approaches that have been becoming part of this can be used in any of those, in any connection one makes with community. And I think as you very clear, it does depend largely on the stage of the project. Very often even a community project will go in with some fixed idea of what the research is going to be. So the research might start focusing on one project, and then a project that the researcher thinks the community needs. And over time the relationship changes and new ideas emerge from the community for new foci. So you may enter with a focus on HIV prevention and use this to develop community links. But then the next project may be on clean water or diarrheal prevention or substance abuse. Obviously funding does start to become a key issue here, because if you had the funding to enter on one project, you've then got to work with the community to raise funding for the following projects, unless you've got genuine funding for community-based study. Alternatively, you can go in on a blank slate or at the request of the community. And there have been genuine instances where community members have approached research institutions or universities and said, we have this problem, can you assist us? And I think if you went to any community, the alternative is to go to a community and say, what are the issues, what can we do, and work through the community leadership, you would get ideas very rapidly. And that's where you're starting from a slightly different place. So, you're starting from scratch to develop ideas. And this is when you're starting to really formulate objectives and processes with community links. Obviously you're doing this with the first idea of going in with one project and then gradually broadening. Over that time you're developing your community relationships, the trust, and all of those issues while you're doing that first project. If you're going in from scratch, you've got to, while developing ideas, you've also got to be developing trust community connections, access, etc. So it's really developing relationship as well, and trust. And a good relationship takes a lot of time and energy. Okay. I've been rattling on. Are there any questions or issues at this point? The other thing to bear in mind is your own rights and wishes. And there is, and it sounds sometimes feels strange to talk about the researcher's rights and wishes, but generally the researcher's rights and wishes are the only things that matter in the study. But in these kind of contexts, there is a possibility of going to the opposite extreme, where the researcher becomes a slave of the community and does end up doing things that are either not viable or not fundable, or not viable, not quality research, or going beyond the researcher's areas of expertise and interest. And so the researcher can also say what they would like to work on. It can't override, but it must contribute. And it's, as in any relationship, all of these, as in any relationship, your needs and you must also be recognized, and your part must also be played. You have, and particularly important because you know the limitations of the kind of work that is being done. You know what would be recognized. So if the community wants to do research on diarrhea, and they want to show that the Department of Health or the Department of Public Services that they need to introduce better services into the community, you know what information is required for that. So it's not just selfish interest, it's also just to make sure that the interests of the community are correctly represented in this. And you need to have others trust your skill. Now there is historically in some communities quite a lot of distrust of researchers based on them moving in and out and not respecting community needs. But so, there are issues that are going to have to be worked through in these relationships. Okay.
But how do you make sure that they trust?
And as in any relationship, you've got to be upfront with what you're looking for, you've got to be honest, and it's not something that's automatically given. You've got to show through, and very often, what I found very often in community settings is you will be tested. So you'll be asked to arrive at a meeting and only 5 people arrive at the meeting, and so you'll be asked to come again, and sometimes it takes 3 or 4 meetings before there's a sense of, okay, this person is going to work with us. You might have to throw a tantrum as well at one or another point. It's, mostly that I just remember when I wasn't community based, but my PhD research, I wanted to work through the but through the political structures in the HIV in the period of apartheid. And it took meetings and multiple meetings before, because obviously a white guy going into township saying he wants to work with the political structure does meet with some apprehension, given that most of white people in their communities are traveling in Caspers and military vehicles. So it just took multiple meetings of going out, talking to people, explaining the research, and I had some political credentials from my involvement in the UDF, but so that I could rely on. And it just literally took time to actually set up meetings, and must have made took about 8 to 9 months and about 10 to 15 trips from Cape Town to Paarl and Stellenbosch to eventually get that trust. So that's the kind of process that you're talking about, and that's kind of at the extreme because it was, just coming with a contentious subject in a political arena, cross race. Some of the people were semi on the run at various times. So that's an extreme scenario, and even yeah, so that's one, but once the trust was there, the trust was well established, and then I had to just continue proving it by constantly making the meetings, showing respect, etc. So, as with anything, if you think of any relationship you're in, it always just takes that effort to make sure that that trust works. And if you break trust at any point, okay, what does this mean? What implications does that have? Yes, so for a student project it gets harder, but and that's also why sometimes an initial project is useful, because you've got something to work together and to show. Also, bringing resources helps a lot with developing relationships. So if you bring in jobs and can show that, or bring in clinic services or something else as part of it, that also does make a big difference. It can also increase distrust. In the one community project, we didn't run the intervention, we ran the evaluation, but there was so much communication around resources in it. And it led to a huge conflict in the community. It was a study looking at drinking and driving amongst youth. It was funded by a workers' organisation, alcohol workers' organisation in France. And we did the study here in Vietnam and Argentina. But in this one community in Cape Town, when we went in, we selected the community, went in and started working with community leadership. And there was one guy who ran everything in the community. Called all things Mr. America. But there was decidedly seedy side to his leadership. And quite early on a division appeared between him and other sectors of the community. And part of the concern, so that was the one issue dealing with. The other one was he came in, he just heard internationally funded study, he heard money, and he wanted access to the money. Now the specific requirements of the funding was that money would not just be handed over to the community. We would fund established projects, and we would fund work that had happened or work that was happening. We wouldn't just give blank checks. So, and that is what they were expecting. So, yeah, there was accusation. So both of those led to some level and disenchantment with one sector of the community. Because what happened at the first committee elections is that Mr. America was not elected. And there's another person was put in place, who actually also didn't do very much on intervention, but at least was able to put a far more stable influence. But there was also a lot of anger about the resources not coming directly to them and having to work through other systems. As in the end, a very strong system was developed, and particularly a strong youth group intervention was developed. And I think probably the biggest contribution that this project made was the training of a cadre of youth workers, about 40 or 50 youth workers, and real skills around community organisation. I think there was an intervention run. From the survey results, we haven't seen a huge difference in impact, but it's, in a year with a limited intervention, it's very hard to impact on a community of about 20,000 people with any real change in risk behaviour. But the structure was developed, and hopefully that will remain ongoing. But you've got to be prepared to give up some parts of your life, particularly weekends and evenings, to do community work, because that's when it does come in. It's similarly when I was working with sex workers in Claremont. I would go once a month in the evening to a meeting. I would greet them when I was wandered around, and I would have to, when we did interviews, it was acceptance of people. And it's an attitude issue. If you go in and insist on cleaning off the seat before you sit down, or checking the glasses for germs before you drink from them. Yeah, it's going to put particular issues of trust. So it's behavioural issues as well. And it's just talking about acceptance of people where they are. When you walk into people's homes, they're not cringy. You can respect, you can offer concern about the poor at the shack being about to fall down, and people would appreciate that. But it's been appropriate, watching cues. It's all issues around relationship. So when you enter with a new partner, it's how you develop that relationship. It's very similar, except it's with a lot more people and a lot more gets demanded. Well, I'm not sure a lot more gets demanded, but